But I certainly wasn't expecting to give a presentation when I arrived here tonight. No, I did not know that when I arrived. So this is a little sudden. So I do want to say ni hao, and for those of you from Texas, ni howdy. So what we're going to talk about, well, first I've got the map of China, and I do want to just make a couple of comments. China is about the same size geographically as the United States, and roughly the same number of square kilometers, square miles, however you want to measure it. There is a lot less fertile ground, though, and you can kind of see along the green area. There's also a huge area here. That's the Tibetan Plateau next to the Himalayas. And China does get virtually all its water, I think, from the Himalayas. So with the declining snowfall due to global warming, that is impacting their water supply. Okay, so you're going to get some of what, I guess maybe quite a bit of what I was talking about at Ollie. And I was talking about mostly the economy, technology, and commerce. There's some areas, this is a tie. You can see it's a Donald Trump tie, Make America Great. I don't know, can you see where it's made? Made in China. Okay. Just quickly, the demographics of China there's some important elements of this. Well, maybe they're all important. But the population is about 1.4 billion. That's about 4.5 times the size of the U.S. That's why it's such a good market. And that's why a lot of corporations want to do business in China. Square miles are about the same. GDP is about 12 trillion versus 19 trillion for the U.S. Now, in purchasing power parity, China passed the U.S. in 2016 in GDP. Purchasing power parity is an adjustment to GDP based on cost of living in the two countries. Rent, for example, is much cheaper in China than it is in the United States. So there's a lot of adjustments in. I'm not a big fan of purchasing power parity, but it's there. Per capita GDP is almost $9,000 in China. It's almost $60,000 in the U.S. There was in 2017. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that and the changes there later. Ethnicity is 92% are Han Chinese. 56%. There are 56 recognized ethnic groups. In the religion, 18% are Buddhists, 5% Christian, 2% Muslim. Communist Party members make up about 6.6%. And the military budget is 1.9% of GDP versus the U.S. at somewhere around 3.6. So that's a lot of, we're not going to do a lot of, we're going to do some. This is, I think, is kind of an interesting chart because it tells a real story. And up through about 1980 was a Mao era. And economic growth per capita, or personal income per capita, just didn't grow at all during the whole Mao era. Deng Xiaoping then became the leader, and it changed. It started to change dramatically. And India is the lower line, and they have not increased nearly as well. So the Mao period was 49 to 76. Deng Xiaoping, I've got some quotes of his. One of them is, a fundamental contradiction does not exist between socialism and a market economy. Another one is, poverty is not socialism, to be rich is glorious. And one that I've heard him quoted more than any of the others, no matter if it is a white cat or a black cat, as long as it can catch mice, it's a good cat. Jiang Zemin followed Deng Xiaoping, and he continued the program. He created the term socialist market economy. He created special economic zones, which were attractive to foreign businesses. They had special tax rates. And he was born in Yangzhou, and right at the end, you're going to hear a little bit more about the city of Yangzhou, because that's where I worked. Hu Jintao, near as I could tell, didn't do much. And Xi Jinping's done a lot, and not all of it, in my opinion, has been positive. So, production in China, I guess we're getting a little more into the production side. State-owned enterprises, which everything was a state-owned enterprise under Mao. Today, they're about 30% of the assets are in state-owned enterprises. Private make up about 70% of the total assets. I don't know, I'm probably blocking some of this for you all. Anyway, but the state-owned enterprises have 8 times as much debt. Now, that's been a problem for the private enterprises because they think the state-owned enterprises are getting a lot of subsidies, which they are, that are not available to the private sector. The Chinese market, 1.4 billion. Auto sales in 2018 were 29 million, and the US 17 million. So there you can see why China is such an attractive market to, well, the automakers and a lot of other businesses. When I was working in China, that's what a rush hour looked like. Beijing had, at that time, had 13 million people and 12 million bicycles. Here today, there's an electric bus. The streets are much more crowded than it looks right there. The other thing is, I just think it's kind of interesting. GM makes cars, of course, in China for the China market. This is a Buick. No, it's what do you call it? Not sports utility vehicle, but a no, it's not an SUV. Son of a gun. What? No. It's a minivan. Jeez. I have a cousin who actually just passed away, 92 years old, and he said, when you go through the aging process, he said, let's see, the first thing you forget is names, then you forget faces. He said, then you forget to zip up your pants, and then you forget to unzip your pants. Well, I haven't gotten to that last stage yet. But yeah, minivan, okay. We'll talk a little bit about technology and business. This is a cartoon. He says, we made a startling discovery on the far side of the moon. It's just like the near side, only a little further away. Actually, that was quite an accomplishment, landing on the far side of the moon, because there's no communication between Earth and the lunar landing vehicle, because the moon blocks the communication anyway. Pardon? Yeah. Okay, we're going to talk just briefly about China's technical developments. They invented the compass two centuries before BCE. They actually invented paper making in the 1st century BCE. Diamond Sutra was the first book in 868 AD. We think Gutenberg's press was the first printing press, but it came along about 600 years after the first book was printed. The gunpowder, of course, was invented by the Chinese. There is an interesting thing about that, I think. They didn't use it, they didn't create a lot of weapons out of gunpowder. The Europeans did that. And the reason the Europeans did that was because the Europeans were very good at metallurgy. And the reason they were good at metallurgy was because they'd been making church bells for a long time. So they developed a skill in metallurgy that the China didn't have, and they were able to make cannons and guns. Anyway, it's a little historical trivia. The Opium Wars were in the 1800s. The foreigners humiliated the Chinese. It still has impacts today on the Chinese thinking. It certainly does on the way people do business in China. They are very resistant to foreign control, which is what happened during the Opium Wars. So now I'm going to talk a little about technology transfer. There's 2 kinds, voluntary and involuntary. And involuntary is the one that gets a lot of the publicity. But I want to just do a little bit of, I'm going to talk about joint ventures. Joint ventures are the most common way for foreign companies to do business in China. And from the foreign company's point of view, it's attractive because it gives you a market, it gives you some production, it gives you a distribution network. What you really have to do is go in and dramatically improve the product that they're producing. What I thought, or what I kind of concluded was, first of all, the Chinese want partial ownership. They would really like 51% ownership in the joint ventures. So a lot of the American companies are minority owners. Now, it depends, it varies. It depends on how badly they want the company to come in. John Deere has a combine factory that was a joint venture outside of Harbin, and the government ownership is 10%. John Deere owns 90%, but they really wanted John Deere to come in. So what they want is, well, the partial ownership, they want investment in facilities. They want you to bring money and upgrade their facilities. They want American technology. They want American training, and that's mine, the last one, and they want you to leave. What a lot of companies, and you hear this, they steal the technology, and you know, they do. We'll talk a little bit about that. But most companies, at least when I was over there, were bringing in older technology, at least the manufacturing companies. We were bringing in 10-year-old technology, basically. I worked on a diesel engine joint venture. And the diesel engines they were making were Russian designs from about 1950. And there was no, during the communist era, no motivation to improve them in any way. So they were really poor products. So we could come in with a 10-year-old technology, and it was still dramatically better than what they had. Stealing technology, this is not new to China. The Industrial Revolution, I guess it got kicked off in 1776 with the invention of the steam engine. But for the next 100 years or so of the Industrial Revolution, most of the innovations, most of them actually came from Great Britain. Now, England and France also contributed. Very few came from the US. And one thing the American companies then did was go over and hire the people that had invented the products and bring them over to this company and produce similar products. It is a big and chronic problem in China today. Companies can get judgments, but there's no enforcement of the judgments. So it really doesn't do you a lot of good to get the judgments. There's a law that's created a big problem with in several areas. It's the National Intelligence Law the Chinese adopted in 2017. It requires Chinese companies to support, provide assistance, and to cooperate in China's national intelligence work wherever they operate. And that's what has created the rise and the concerns over Huawei. And I'm sure you've all heard things about Huawei. I'm just going to real quickly go through. Huawei in 2017 had about $75 billion in sales. It's about the same size as IBM. I should have asked you how many think Apple is the largest cell phone manufacturer in the world. They're actually third. Number one is Samsung. Huawei's number two. They are a big supplier of 5G equipment. That's the new networking equipment. And it's a significant upgrade from 4. And the concern is that Huawei will put in backdoors in this equipment if they install it in Poland, for example, or any countries. That's one that's come up that will give them access to the data that's going over those networks. That's the big concern. Huawei, of course, says that absolutely wouldn't do that. Anyway, and you know the CFO was maintained. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I want to get to what China's objectives are today, because I think that's important to us. They want to be number one in renewable energy. 20% of their energy already comes from hydro, which ours is very, very small, but about 15% comes from wind and solar. They have nearly double what the US has in wind and solar. Now, if they have so much wind and solar and so much hydro, why is it so polluted all the time? Well, they've got 4.5 times as many people. So they still burn a lot of coal. Coal was a primary means of heating in homes, residences, in the wintertime. And so the air quality from October to April is significantly worse than it is, during the months when they're not burning coal to heat. Okay, China wants to be number one in high-speed electric rail. They have 15,000 miles of high-speed electric rail, and the U.S. has none. So they're clearly the leader. They want to be number one in the production and use of electric cars, and they're now almost triple what the U.S. is. Here's a graph. You can see where China is about. Well, this is 2017. but 579,000, the US is 198,000, so they're about triple what the US is in electric cars. Again, it's a bigger market, though. I mean, they want to be number one in quantum computing. Quantum computing is a really big deal. It's, according to NASA, quantum computing is 3,600 times faster than supercomputers. It's several million times faster than the computer in your cell phone. So it is really significant. They put the first satellite up that's using quantum cryptography. Now, who's ahead? I don't know how you measure. No, I don't know that anybody knows how to measure who's ahead in this, but I want to show you their research facility that they built just for quantum computing. They built a significant research center for quantum computing. Okay, they want to be number one in artificial intelligence. They are trailing the US, fairly significantly in artificial intelligence. But Eric Schmidt, who was the chairman at Google, that said, and China's putting a lot of effort into AI. He said by 2020, China will have caught up in AI. By 2025, they will be ahead of the US, and by 2030, they will dominate the industry. And it is because of the effort that they are putting into it. Okay, we're doing pretty well. Yeah, I remember this is years ago. There was an international group, and some of them were giving speeches, and one of them said, "I see the Americans when they give a speech, they take off their watch and they set it on the podium. What does that mean?" And the host said, "It doesn't mean a damn thing." Okay. Okay, we're getting into opinion now, okay? And I'm sure other people share this opinion, but this is my opinion. The two biggest issues facing civilization are global warming and China becoming the hegemon. I think those are the two. We're not going to talk about the first one. There are some forecasts out there about the Chinese economy. It's 1.5 times. The International Monetary Fund predicted that it would, by 2050, which is, 21 years away, 1.5 times the US. PricewaterhouseCoopers has a model, and they predicted the same thing. And the Economist Intelligence Unit also predicted about the same thing. The Economist Intelligence Unit has offices in Hong Kong, and if you're doing business over there, they're good people to talk to because they do have a lot of intelligence. There was something else I was going to say about that, but okay. So 2050, the rankings in all those forecasts are China number one in GDP, India number two, the European Union, assuming that it gets its act together, number three, and the United States will fall into fourth place by the middle of the century. I've wondered if the United States is going to become like France, kind of a whiny former great power.
What's the U.S. now?
Oh, U.S. is number one. Yes, excluding this purchasing power parity thing. Yeah, no, the U.S. is number one. EU is probably, when you put all the countries in the EU together, I'm sure it's number two. I don't know. China, without the EU, is number two if you don't consider the EU today. The arithmetic, I've argued, now, but I'm going to back up, so I don't want to get into that too quickly. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was at the Chinese Embassy in Washington, D.C. for a World Affairs event, and I asked some of the people when they expected that China would pass the U.S. in GDP. And I was wandering, we were having drinks, and when I wandering around, I asked a variety of them. They all said 2032. So they only all agreed, but they've given this a fair amount of thought. I've asked our State Department people when they think it'll happen. They don't think it's going to happen. They just think there's way too many problems, and it's not going to happen. Well, I'm reasonably good at arithmetic, And the arithmetic is on China's favors China. When per capita income in China becomes 1/2 of what it is in the United States, they will have double the GDP. And it's because they have more than 4 times as many people. I mean, it's just really simple math. Okay. And just to show you what the growth they've had, and this is in per capita GDP from Mao to 2014. I got the numbers. Mao GDP was per capita was about $90, and it's 7,300 today. That's about 81 times growth. The U.S. during that same time period grew about 5.4 times. So they have had a history of pretty rapid growth. Now they started from a really small base, and that gives you a huge advantage. And again using arithmetic. There's been a lot of news about the Thucydides trap, a rising power. It causes fear in the hearts and minds of the established power, and it leads to war. And that came from when Sparta was the big leading power, and Athens was the rising power, and of course they ended up fighting. Somebody has done some statistical analysis on that, and it doesn't always happen. It didn't happen when the U.S. replaced Great Britain as the leading power in the world. But somewhere around 8 out of 10 times it seems to have happened. At least that's the statistics that I've read. Okay, now we're going to talk about Yangzhou. I worked in Yangzhou. It's about an hour west of Nanjing or Nanking. The city is 2,500 years old. You are going to learn something tonight. I'm almost certain none of you know. I mean, you might, but I doubt it. It's 2,500 years old. It was a major center of commerce for a couple of reasons, for about 1,000 years. It was the salt capital of China. And historically, salt was what was used to preserve food when there was no refrigeration. So salt was an extremely important product. And Yangzhou was the salt capital. It also is where the Great Canal and the Yangtze merged or converged. It is today the 44th largest city in China, just to give you some perspective. It's a population of 2.4 million. Houston is 2.3 million. I think Houston's the 3rd largest city, 3rd or 4th in the United States. This is an item you probably don't know. Marco Polo was the governor of Yangzhou from 1282 to 1287. And this is how he got to be the governor. Kublai Khan, one of the Mongols, was the head of China, was ruling China. And he was concerned that the Chinese in leadership positions might get together and try to overthrow him. He was pretty sure that foreigners were not going to do that. So he put foreigners into positions of importance. At that time, Yangzhou was a very important city, so he made Marco Polo the mayor of and that's one of the first things I learned when I got to Yangzhou. I arrived, and one of the Chinese that we were working with said, "Did you know that Marco Polo was the mayor of Yangzhou?" No idea. So you can now go away and say, "I learned something from the talk tonight." This is what Yangzhou looks like. It kind of looks like an ordinary city. The tourist attraction is their bridge with the 5 roofs. It's popular on weekends. Another picture of it. And these are the Marco Polo Gardens in Yangzhou, honoring him when he was the governor of Yangzhou. I'm going to end with some Chinese proverbs, ancient Chinese proverbs. The first one is, "A wise man builds bridges, a fool builds walls." That is an ancient Chinese proverb. It hasn't reached all the quarters of the United States yet. But the second one is, "Moving too quickly is like eating uncooked rice. A closed mind is like a closed book, just a block of wood." Stuffed ducks don't quack. I've used that in meetings that I've been with when there are participants in the meetings that don't talk. I remind them that stuffed ducks don't quack, and that oftentimes gets them to speak up. And then, of course, there are two kinds of perfect people, those who are dead and those who are not yet born. And this is just a suggestion. When you're traveling abroad, if you don't know about this, I'm going to tell you about it. You may already know about it. The CIA World Factbook is a great source when you're getting ready to go to a country where maybe you haven't been or you don't know everything there is to know. There's just an enormous amount of good information about, 180 different countries. It's a great resource. Online. Yeah. Yeah, before we go into any country, I go to this, and it's just an amazing amount of information that, no. No. Okay, so now we're going to have at least two people answering questions, and I think we have a third over here. Yes, well, Joe has traveled in China, taught in China, led five groups, tourist groups to China, and Bradford is...
Yeah, I lived in Guilin, China for 13 years. I was a director of a university there, and then in 2009 I co-founded the Chinese Language Institute, and we've led, this year we'll bring about 500 students from around the world to China to learn Mandarin, and then another, of those 500, we'll have about 25 groups come over as well. University groups and high school groups.
So these two guys know a lot more about China than I do, so I am relieved to get to the Q&A. Okay.
Thank you very much for stepping in. Maybe I'm the only one in the room who doesn't know your history, but I don't have a bio on you.
Oh, good. I'm going to bring up something else because of you asked about the bio. Okay, I'm from Iowa, which explains a lot of things. And I got a degree from Iowa State University and then a degree from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to mention the reason that brought to mind something. In China, there's a lot less government regulations than there are in the U.S., and that's enabled them to do some things, both good and bad, that take a lot longer in the U.S. And I get the Pennsylvania Gazette, which is the alumni magazine, which was first started by Benjamin Franklin, who founded the University of Pennsylvania. Anyway, there was a doctor who was on an international team that was doing cancer research, and they came up with some kind of serum or something that they used in rats, and it cured cancer. And so what they wanted to do with it was test it in humans, and they wanted to test it in humans where the medical profession had concluded that they were going to die within 6 months. This was the group that they wanted to go to test. In China, they had a Chinese person on the team. It was an international team. The Chinese doctor, a researcher, went back, made a 3-hour presentation, and got approval to use it on people who had 6 months to live. This guy had been working for 2 years and still hadn't gotten approval to test it on people. So the Chinese are able to do some things much faster. Okay, I'm sorry, I got off. I worked for John Deere most of my career. My background's corporate finance, and I've worked in China, India, and several European countries. Yeah, I'm a World Affairs junkie. I got invited to be on the board of the Quad City World Affairs Council in 1968. And so I've been on World Affairs Council boards for more than 50 years. But the only reason I was invited to get on that was because I was younger than any of the other board members by 30 years. It had nothing to do with knowledge or skill.
Another question.
I'm sorry.
Sir, I'm an old China scholar and very old. Would the average citizen of China know anything about Chiang Kaishek and Madam Chiang?
I don't know that. They know there's a lot less information that they have. They don't know, for example, that in the Cultural Revolution, there was an estimated 30 million people or so, or maybe more. Some of the estimates are higher than that died. They don't know anything about that. I ended up talking to people about Tiananmen Square. Most of the Chinese didn't know anything about Tiananmen Square, and what happened there. It was, of course, a big news item. I did talk to one guy who did, and he, during the Cultural Revolution, he and his sister had been sent out. His father was active in the Communist Party, and the Red Guard took him off and embarrassed him and shamed him. And the two kids all went to two different farms. The farm families didn't want them, but that was their life. So they had a real bad taste about the Red Guard. So here comes Tiananmen Square along, and it's students again, and it's a student uprising again. And the only student uprising they knew was the Red Guard. And they said, you're just totally against any another student uprising. But back to your question, yeah, you can't Google in China. And they've got some weird reasons that they give. Yeah, there's a lot less information. The internet has helped the Chinese people, and travel has too. And I don't know, maybe you want to comment on that?
I think people would know Chiang Kaishek, not by the name Chiang Kaishek, they would know that Jiang Jieshi by his... Chiang Kaishek is the Cantonese name, where Jiang Jieshi is the Mandarin name. I think they would know him in the same way that we know Robert E. Lee, as a defeated general from the losing side. And then I don't know how much you know about Chiang Kai-shek, but he basically led the 1% of China to Taiwan in 1949, and that's the founding of Taiwan. And pretty much from 49 until the early 70s, Taiwan claimed to be ruling all of mainland China under Chiang Kai-shek. And then soon after that, the UN and then the US recognized mainland China as actual China.
And he took a lot of the valuable artifacts from from China and put them in a museum, and they have a great museum in Taipei. Yeah.
Okay. I've been to China one time with Joe. All right, and so I have limited data points. All right, but my observation would be China's big issues were really water and pollution. And what do you comment on that?
Well, pollution, I think, is their biggest issue. And again, yeah, it's a really big issue, and it's not just the air pollution. A lot of those particles are falling to the ground and they're getting in the soil. And some of the rice, particularly in the southern part of the country now, has chemicals in it that are over the limit for whatever the chemicals are supposed to be in rice, and they're still selling it. I don't buy Chinese rice, frankly. And water is going to become an increasingly a big problem.
My wife is Chinese, and after living in China for 13 years, we moved back to America 3 years ago. And there's three main reasons we moved back to the country. One is pollution, which includes water pollution and air pollution. Two is food pollution. You can't really trust what's in the food. DDT is still commonly used. And then three is education. The education system, even though they test very well in Shanghai and some of the big cities, they test very well, but as far as creativity goes, I think there's still leaps and bounds behind what we're doing in the States. So for us, pollution was the main reason. Pollution of food, pollution of air, and then pollution of education.
John Bomfort spoke at DU. He was a Washington Post columnist that was in Beijing for 20-some years. And what caused them to finally leave was the pollution. They had air purifiers in every room in their house, and they still couldn't get the air quality, or the condo, every air quality down to where it was safe. So they just finally left.
Comment. Actually, it's a comment, not a question, sorry. One of our other OLLI instructors is teaching a class on the Cold War and in his prior presentation asked about Vietnam, and none of the young people knew anything about Vietnam. So it's not just in China that gap, for those of us that were involved, fortunately for me, I was in Korea instead of Vietnam, but that history, the recent history doesn't pass on. Like, to me, World War II and everything that happened, I actually had a classmate that had been in one of the concentration camps. That wasn't history, it was just somebody else. That wasn't history to us. So Vietnam is not history to our young people, as the question was here presented previously. So sorry I didn't have a question, but I just wanted to make that comment.
Going to get the question up front, and I'll come back to the middle.
I was wondering what you think the effect, I don't know, well, there you go. The effect of China's one-child policy, which has ended but was in effect for a long time, will have on the economy and its growth.
It's having a dramatic impact. The economy is aging. The average age is I don't know what it is, but it's higher than most, much higher than most countries, and they've tried to encourage more than one. I think it's 3 now. I've heard 2. Okay, 2 for urban. Okay. But it's been a serious problem, and the government's efforts have not solved the problem yet.
Yeah, if water and pollution are the 2 big issues, how do the people there complain, or can they? And is the government aware of the problem, and are they trying to solve it?
Oh, the government is very much aware of the problem. And yes.
So what are they trying to do to help?
You can see what their goals are: more electric cars, more high-speed rail. But they're very much, you can't help but be aware of it, but they are very much aware of it. One of the observations I've made, and that's is the difference between the leadership in China and the leadership in the United States. In China, most of the leaders have been engineers. In fact, a lot of them were educated in the United States. Xi Jinping's a chemical engineer. But the body were predominantly engineers after Mao, okay? And the U.S., and engineers are trained in solving problems. In the U.S., most of the majority of Congress, or the plurality of Congress, the biggest number, they're attorneys. And attorneys are trained in argumentation. So I have to wonder if those trained in engineering might be better at solving problems than those trained in argumentation.
I don't know, Dave, you've always got stories and jokes. You know, 2 of my sons are engineers, and my mother-in-law was very proud of herself for finding shirts for them for Christmas this year. They read, "I can solve a problem you don't know you have in ways you will never understand."
He said I could go first. Bradford touched on this a little bit. My initial introduction to China was in culture. And it had to do with theater and the history of theater in China. And I know that we both enjoy music a lot, and there are so many fantastic Chinese musicians now. And I wonder how much the government is involved in that. Or is it, a lot of it is family pressure, I know, like the pianist Lang Lang. He talked about his father making him sleep on a cold floor while he was studying piano. He said he almost killed his father. But does the government have anything to do with that?
There's your answer right there. I'm going to pass on that one.
So there's a lot of classical musicians, like Lang Lang or Yo-Yo Ma Yo-Yo, who are incredible musicians. But as far as pop stars go, most of them studied abroad, studied in America, studied in Japan, studied in Hong Kong, and then moved back and became very famous. The government absolutely subsidizes Olympics, the Olympic athletes. They'll go around to villages and find children whose bodies, they've done this for a long time, yeah, whose bodies fit. They're like, oh, this little kid's going to grow up into an Olympian, at least physically, and they'll pluck them away. A good friend of mine was plucked away when she was 5 years old. Until she was about 20 years old, she was a diver, and she had an accident on a high dive and went blind in one eye. And then they just dropped her. They gave her a settlement. It was like 20 or 30,000 US dollars, which was reasonable. It's numerous years' salary for what she would be getting, but essentially her whole childhood was washed away.
You had a question, too. Can I make a comment on the one-child policy and the two-child?
Yeah.
I was just dealing with this in my class yesterday, actually, but I had the graphs up by age, and you can see that shape, that the biggest ticking time bomb in China is the fact that they are going to have the oldest average population in 20 years of any country, major country in the world. And how do you support that with that small population base? They were expecting, when they lifted that one-child policy, that everybody would be in a real big hurry to have 2 and 3 kids. Indeed, they had adjusted to the one child. Japan right now, urban Japanese, the average childbearing woman has 1.2 children. Replacement is 2.2, the demographic replacement of population. It's going to be a real problem, Japan and China. What? I'm not sure. I wish I did know that. But you look at the graph. The U.S. is much healthier than either Japan or China when you look at that graph.
I'm making a book recommendation. This is the 100-Year Marathon, China's secret strategy to replace America as a global superpower. So they plan to do this by 2049. They start, that's their perspective. And what this tells you is that, well, they have this long view, and it goes back to before the Common Era. And I would really recommend it, because the Chinese will lie, cheat, steal, do anything to achieve their goal, because it's a goal for the people. And this is the book to read. It's kind of the only book I've read on China, but it's very good.
I think to that point, 2049, you said one projection was that China would outpace the U.S. in GDP by 2032, and then it was 2050, very close to the 2049. I wonder, do you believe that that prediction is accurate? I saw 3 sources that said that it was, but what is that going to look like for us here in the United States?
Well, first of all, my favorite American intellectual, Yogi Berra, said that forecasting is easy, except for the part that deals with the future. So yeah, forecasting out that far is challenging. But as I've said, the arithmetic certainly is in the favor. Growth may slow down during the Xi Jinping period of time, because of a lot of the things that he's doing that will probably eliminate. But he's not going to be there forever. They will get new leadership, eventually. So it's hard to predict who the leadership will be, or what they will be, what they will do.
Yeah. My background is in education, undergrad in philosophy and a master's in teaching Chinese. So I'm not quite the expert on geopolitical affairs or the future of China. But I will tell you that the stats you hear that 80% of Chinese people support China, I absolutely believe. I don't think that's like Saddam Hussein winning 99% of the election. But I do think it would quickly turn, and it has quickly turned throughout Chinese history, if he stops performing, and if the economy stops growing, at the rate that it's growing at now, which it's been constant 8 to 11%.
Yeah, yes.
For pretty much since 1980, 1979.
Yep. I've got a couple of quick stories that popped into my mind, partly from that question. Henry Kissinger and what? No. The number 2 person under Mao. Zhou Enlai and Kissinger became very good friends during this process, and they both loved history, and so that's what they ended up talking about. They went off and talked when they were not in meetings. Anyway, the Chinese have a very long point of view. So at one point in time, Kissinger asked Zhou Enlai, "What do you think was the impact of the French Revolution?" And Zhou Enlai half-kiddingly said, "I think it's too early to tell." Another question that Kissinger said he asked was, how do you think the world would have been different if Khrushchev had been assassinated instead of Kennedy? And Zhou Enlai thought for quite a while, and he said, I really don't know, but I am pretty sure that Onassis would not have married Mrs. Khrushchev.
Next question right here. We hear a lot about corruption in China, and leaders of various companies getting tossed in jail for this, that, and the other. How does that impact China's future?
I think it's a drag. I really do think it's a drag, and it's a serious problem. Every government's trying to do more about it, and certainly Xi Jinping is trying to do more about it. Interestingly, when I was over there working, the Chinese really preferred doing joint ventures with American companies, and I was just a little surprised at that, but absolutely they preferred, because they think the American business people are more honest and have more integrity, certainly than the Japanese, who they hated, and more than the Europeans. So that's not an answer to your question. The answer to your question is, yeah, corruption is a huge problem, and it is a drag on the economy, and they seem to be trying to do something about it, but it's just that, what they're doing about it, it may impact 10 or 15% of the corruption. The other 80, 90% still exists.
It may not be all that bad if China's GDP passes ours, because that means they'll have a bigger standing in the international stage, and they could take over the Middle East. Let them have it.
Yeah, that's, Jim said they probably won't make that mistake.
Well, I'd like to hear you comment on this, that in one of the earlier slides, China was going to lead the United States by whatever it was, by 2050. And here we just got done talking about an aging population. Now, how does an aging population fit in with the dynamics to beat the United States?
Okay, part of the reason is because it is such a large population. It's just, it's 4.5 times the size. It's also, I sometimes point out that I think that they say that 2% of the population are geniuses. Well, they have 4.5 times as many geniuses as we do. So they've got a lot of problem solvers out there. But it's a very serious problem, but I think it's just the size of the
I keep hearing that Trump is near some kind of an agreement with the Chinese. Do you have an idea what's going on there and what he hopes to accomplish, the tariffs and everything? Do you think it'll work? Do you think, what do we do with China, I guess? And if you don't think he's doing a good idea, what do you think we should be doing?
I am personally impacted by the tariffs with China because I have 2 farms in Iowa that grow soybeans. And the farmers that are on both those farms are lost money, clearly lost money. Now, interestingly, they're still Trump supporters, and they understand they lost it because of the trade embargo. I don't think the trade embargo, I don't think that the trade war is a good solution. It may bring about some help in the stealing of technology. One of the things that's happened, though, in 2015, Obama and the Chinese had an agreement to cut back on this cyber hacking, both countries, and it came way down. Now that we've had the trade war with China, the hacking has skyrocketed again. And the same thing was true with Iran. It went way down after the Iran deal, and now the Iranians are back to cyber warfare. So it's gone way up. So there are side effects to trade wars that don't always get in the press and you may not think about. But I'm not a big advocate of them. But I don't. Yeah, that's a complicated question. I don't know the solution. I don't know if anybody else wants to take it on. Yeah, too soon to know. Yeah.
I have a question about the government treatment of minorities, particularly Uyghurs, and the whole situation in Tibet. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Do you want to take that one?
So the Uyghurs are in Xinjiang province, which is the province just north of Tibet. Mostly a Muslim.
They're a Muslim minority. I had a trip planned in 2009 to go to Xinjiang, and right just before my trip was about to embark, riots broke out, and they broke out actually in Guangzhou. What had happened? Guangzhou is down near Hong Kong. It's one of the main. When you see "Made in China," it often means "Made in Guangzhou."
Canton.
The Canton, yes, exactly, Canton province. There were workers that there was an accusation of some sexual harassment or something maybe worse, and the worker was a Uyghur worker down there and got attacked. I possibly got either beaten to death or beaten very severely, and then there were protests all the way back in his home province up in Xinjiang, and these protests boiled over to the entire area was on lockdown. The entire province, like think of Montana on lockdown. And my university told me I could not go. They forbade me from going. Physically, I still could have gone and gotten on the plane and gone there, but I just would have been stuck in this one little town. I couldn't have left the town. I don't see the problem getting any better now with the Uyghurs. Han Chinese are 92+% of China, and they have a policy of infiltrating Tibet and Xinjiang and giving incentives to have Han Chinese move there, so that just slowly the culture will be watered down with Han Chinese. And the Uyghurs don't like it very much. I don't think the Tibetans like it very much, but I don't see that slowing anytime soon.
Yeah. They provide some incentives for the Chinese to marry into the minorities.
Yeah, same technique. Yeah. Just move the Han in. Yeah. Yep. He said it's the same technique they used in Tibet. Just put the Han there and let them start families. One of the head teachers at my school in Guilin, she is the fourth child, which is illegal. She's now she's about 30, but she was born in the single child policy. And so what happened when she was born is that while her mother was pregnant, the local government said, you cannot have the baby here. If you want to have the baby, you have to go to Xinjiang. And so she moved to Xinjiang and was born in Xinjiang and raised there. Because the government, even though there was a single child policy, they would allow the Han Chinese to go to Xinjiang to have a baby there.
Other questions? Question?
I'd like just to comment about the Dalai Lama, because in the book I'm reading, you are not to talk about the Dalai Lama at all.
What feedback do you have on that, on the Dalai Lama?
Yeah, you don't talk about it.
I've been to Tibet 3 times, and you don't see any postcards with the Dalai Lama on it. And the tour guides are told not to talk about it. So it's.
Aren't the Chinese raising the next Dalai Lama? They've done the choosing and they're raising him in Beijing, I heard.
So part of the deal so Tibet and China have had relations for at least the last 1,000 years, and China has always approved the Dalai Lama. The Tibetans will choose who the Dalai Lama is, the next one is, the next reincarnation, and then the Chinese government kind of just ticks the box and says yes. There's a fear that the Chinese government will not agree with.
Will not agree with the next Dalai Lama chosen, and so the current Dalai Lama, who's in his high 70s, maybe in his 80s, he's 83. Yeah, he's said that he might choose to not reincarnate, and will not come back, and that's just kind of a sticking it to the Chinese government. Yeah, but I went to Tibet for the first time in 2001, and I met a local kid at a restaurant there, and he brought me back to his home village, and he pulled this dresser. There was this big dresser, and he slid it off to the side, and behind it were all these pictures of the Dalai Lama, just hundreds and hundreds of pictures of the Dalai Lama. And at that point, I had just gotten to China. I didn't really speak much Chinese, but I understood what was happening. And his mom came home right then, and his mom was scared to death that he was sharing this shrine with me. And she quickly pushed it back and said, no, don't tell me. Basically, she told me, don't tell anybody. And this is still true today. You can't have pictures of the Dalai Lama. There's numerous actors who support the Dalai Lama who are banned now from China, right? And performers as well. I don't know if they still happen, but there used to be free Tibet concerts, and any of those acts that performed in the free Tibet concert can't perform in China now.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.